The pattern begins with repetition presented as evidence. When a system returns to baseline after a small disturbance, the absence of immediate damage is treated as verification. The person in charge claims continuity. Others co-sign it because they want to allocate attention elsewhere. The cycle hardens into a rule. What held yesterday will hold tomorrow. The claim is not tested. It is rehearsed until it becomes the only acceptable description. The local environment trains for ease. Metrics are designed to show regularity. Reports compressed variance. Because rough edges require narrative work and create management drag, small gaps get patched informally and are not classified as structural. Uncomfortable data is reframed as temporary noise. Events that violate the stability script are defined as outliers by default. The surface stays smooth by removing friction, not by building capacity. The person gains from the posture. Reliability is a currency, and they spend it before it is earned. To appear steady is to be trusted with more scope, so the declaration of stability becomes a strategy. It works because most observers do not check. People defer to published numbers and approved dashboards. The existence of a process becomes proof of quality. The record of non-events looks like competence. Risk is buried under professional tone and procedural volume. The warning signs were ignored until capacity failed. The mind organizes around shortcuts. It is easier to believe that a mature system tends toward order than to admit that order is an active cost. Once a system is described as stable, maintenance becomes janitorial rather than strategic. Problems are cast as exceptions to an established rule, not as challenges to it. The label makes further inspection socially expensive. The group treats doubt as disruption and hides it under culture language. Any challenge is framed as misunderstanding rather than detection. Stability is not felt. It is inferred from delayed feedback. When the loop is long, the belief holds with little resistance. Internal signals that would contradict it are dismissed because they are early, weak, or inconvenient. Complaints are downgraded by origin, not content. People inside the pattern reclassify discomfort as impatience. They use authority to set the clock and declare outcomes premature. The longer the clock, the more the belief hardens. The reinforcement is social. Before it is technical, teams swap assurances. Leaders reward those who lower perceived volatility, not those who surface it. Praise travels to the person who keeps calendars predictable. Escalations are seen as incompetence rather than vigilance. The incentive is to show calm, not to build resilience. The room punishes outliers, who test for hidden breakpoints. The test is defined as noise because it risks the story. The margin was gone before anyone noticed. Data presentation becomes part of the mechanism. Pre-aggregation removes outlying points that would destabilize the view. Baselines are updated to absorb drift so that deviation graphs stay flat. Early losses are written down as strategic bets. Near misses are catalogued as successful interventions. The label of stability contains each deviation and narrates it as handled. The pattern selects evidence that affirms itself and automates its own continuation. Language performs the closer. Terms like mature, standard, and proven appear in updates until they pass without scrutiny. Documentation is written to define acceptable variance as normalization. Postmortems are scoped to avoid questioning initial premises. If one interval closes without a public event, the interval itself becomes part of the argument. People quote the interval length rather than its content. The performance is consistent. No bad news that cannot be restated as planned. The subjective feeling of justification is anchored to the absence of personal cost. As long as nothing punishes the person directly, they treat the lack of friction as validation. The few who bear costs are classified as edge cases. The system continues as scheduled, and silence is interpreted as alignment. Discomfort is a private matter for those who notice. Official channels collect only tractable items and leave systemic issues untouched. The formal network sees what it is built to see. The operational response to tension is smoothing. When a process runs late, critical steps are dropped to hit a date and later claimed as unnecessary. When a team loses coverage, responsibilities are combined and later claimed as efficiency. Patchwork becomes design, and design is narrated back as intentional. Each exception enters the standard, not as a warning, but as precedent. The average hides accumulation. The future debt is made invisible through recoding. Real accountability disappeared under routine status reports. People inside the pattern misread compliance as commitment. They believe agreement when they are merely being avoided. Meetings end on time, which is taken as proof that conflicts are solved. The same nods are produced week after week. The actual work reroutes away from the declared plan. But the declared plan is what gets reported. The document wins because it is the only object allowed into the record. The person in charge mistakes documentation for control. The mechanism also relies on substitution. Hard verification is replaced with signals that look like it. Checklists are completed without being tied to real thresholds. Audits are scheduled, not targeted. Certification events are mastered for presentation, then treated as continuous proof. Complexity is compressed into categories that ignore interaction effects. Oversight is measured by volume of oversight, not by what it detects. The structure creates its own shadow and believes the shadow. Distance increases immunity. As the leader moves away from the details, stability becomes a negotiation rather than a measurement. They rely on intermediaries whose incentives are aligned to preserve harmony. Information is filtered to prevent emotional discomfort and to maintain access. The most decisive statements are produced by people most insulated from the field. Doubt is traded away for standing. The result is a closed loop, disguised as governance. Coalitional logic seals it. People join the claim because it lowers their exposure. Shared belief spreads responsibility, so no one owns the failure point. Risk is socialized while credit is privatized. If an event does not trigger a career consequence, it does not happen in the internal story. The pattern produces mutual protection under cover of professionalism. Stability is not shown. It is declared by a quorum with something to lose. The individual internalizes this as identity. To them, steadiness is their differentiator. So, contrary evidence is an attack on self, not a signal. They avoid tests that could falsify the claim, because failure would collapse status. They prefer ambiguities that can be explained away, because ambiguity does not damage the brand. They hone language that converts loss into maturity. The more they play the role, the less their environment can break character. The belief becomes a defense, not a measure. Underneath, the variability remained. Inputs change, interfaces drift, and dependencies evolve. The person treats these shifts as cosmetic because their view is optimized to ignore them. Where new checks would be needed, old reports are copied. Where new risks appear, old confidence is applied. The system's actual behavior is replaced by a summary. That summary continues to stand because the audience does not push it to the ground. Once the pattern becomes visible from the outside, the picture of the person is rewritten without fanfare. Observers do not announce the downgrade. They simply reclassify the source of calm from competence to avoidance. The same tone that once seemed reassuring now reads as a deflection. The claims of steadiness are recognized as untested assertions. The past is recoded as a streak of near misses and glossed failures. The story is set, and it does not require debate. Trust is lost and not recovered. People with options reassign their dependencies. They reroute around the person to reduce exposure. Requests that once flowed through them are split and handed to quieter operators. Slack disappears as a courtesy. Meetings are accepted, then inside conversations move to channels where the person is not present. No one states the change. The absence is enough. Authority shrinks behind a title that remains. At first, this looks like procedural shifts. Documents are still addressed to the person, but decisions are drafted elsewhere. Approvals become rubber stamps and are issued late. Sensitive topics are reframed to avoid their desk entirely. Information arrives polished and thin, because no one expects scrutiny. The individual speaks as if influential, but their words do not redirect effort. The orbit shrinks while the badge stays the same. Respect is priced daily. Once the perception of assumed stability sticks, the price drops. People allocate deference to those who do not need to perform control theater. Credit moves to operators who can show evidence on demand. The person loses negotiating power in subtle moments. Their asks face friction they did not face before. Others do not push back loudly. They slow walk, stall, and let time deny the request. Opponents do not need to organize. The weight of previous claims does it for them. Each new assertion is discounted by the record of what was overlooked. Even when correct, the person is received as if they are gaming the narrative again. The benefit of the doubt is gone, so errors stick sharper. Favors are not repaid. Margins for error narrow in a way that cannot be argued away. Their access closes without any public notice. Vendors push them to standard queues. Internal teams stop volunteering extras. Discretionary bandwidth is allocated elsewhere. High-value peers stop offering early looks. They are invited to announce decisions already made. Their presence is tolerated because removal would cost energy, not because it is useful. The difference is visible in outcomes, not in memos. The loss propagates into selection. They are no longer the reference point for difficult work. Strategic assignments land with people who have not burned credibility on unfounded.com. When priorities conflict, they receive the lesser path that cannot fail loudly. Their calendar stays full of status meetings that do not convert to leverage. The world they see still appears stable because nothing volatile is left near them. That is not safety. That is isolation. Promotion committees read the same signals. The person is marked as risk-averse in the wrong dimension, not careful with reality, only careful with appearance. The narrative writes itself in short phrases that close doors. Talks big, checks little, keeps it smooth, misses shifts. Compensation stalls without announcement. The increase in title stops, meaning an increase in control. Their name leaves the shortlist for problems that matter. Those below adjust. Direct reports learn that escalation is unwelcome and root around to survive. They grow skilled at crafting updates that protect them rather than inform. Attrition removes anyone who needs real support. Remaining staff build local coping systems that do not rely on the person's judgment. That makes the person less central over time. They are informed last when the ground moves. Peers adapt for their own safety. They stop pairing their bets with the person's calendar. When interlocks are required, they reduce scope and write stronger exit clauses. Collaboration shifts from partnership to compliance. Feedback is delivered in the smallest possible units to avoid argument. The environment accepts that change will not be driven from that node. It no longer tries. Outside observers see the same drift without needing to know internal details. They pick up lagging signals. Slower response to change, flatter outcomes, visibly rehearsed updates. Reputation in the market adjusts with similar silence. Invitations narrow. Informal opportunities do not appear for those who are already labeled as cosmetic. The person notices the social difference and explains it to themselves as politics. The label does not move. The result is maintenance without meaning. The role survives as a container for tasks. People use it as a place to send work that needs to be documented but not altered. The outputs look organized and tidy, but they are copies of last quarter. The person manages optics while others manage uncertainty. The function appears as a point of contact, not as a source of force. The gap is obvious to those who need results. From that point, prediction is simple. When stress arrives, the person will say the system is stable. Those listening will already have prepared alternate lines. They will not argue. They will not test the claim with the person. They will proceed around it and allow the claim to stand unchallenged and unused. The person will report that everything is on track. The track will be empty. The quiet downgrade spreads into the archive. Written histories place them at the edge of pivotal periods with neutral language. Credit is assigned elsewhere. Failure is described as environmental when they are involved and as personal when others are. Even that asymmetry is not debated. It is just how the story reads when measured against outcomes. No one expends effort to rewrite it. People who once relied on their assurances internalize a rule about them. They assume there will be a claim of calm. They assume it will not map to the real state. They budget time to undo and redo. They ask fewer open questions in their presence. They check their own risk without expecting help. The person becomes a factor to be managed, not a partner to be counted on. There is no reclaiming of narrative through better statements. Words are not the missing piece. The deficit is not verbal but evident. Those who needed proof did not get it when it mattered. The vacuum was filled by behavior they could observe. Evasion, smoothing, delay. Once those patterns are set, interpretations do not reverse. What is predicted keeps happening. Titles and artifacts continue untouched. The inbox stays heavy. The status pages update on schedule. The machine of appearances works without interruption because it is self-maintaining. Actual levers sit elsewhere. They are pulled by people whose claims are tied to observable change. The difference marks the boundary between position and power. Nothing dramatic needs to occur. There is no scene where someone names what has happened. The reallocation completes silently. Influence exits first, then discretion, then meaningful work. Each step looks procedural, almost polite. By the time the person realizes the full extent, the system has already adapted to their absence. The meetings continue, and the rhythm holds. Deliverables are met in the narrow sense, and reports say so. The long axis remains untouched. The environment has already priced in the assumption that their stability was never proven. The map they rely on stays clean. The actual terrain has already shifted around them. The decisions are made without them.